The forge had been cold for 3 weeks when Yenna of the Ashvin clans came down from the pass. Not cold in the way of a forge resting between jobs, cold in the way of a thing that will not be lit again. The bellows hung still. The anvil was clean. Edvard Karl's 2 grown children, Marit and Soren, had covered the tools in oiled cloth the way their mother had shown them, years ago, when there was still a mother to show them anything. The village of Callow Thresh had brought bread and soup and 2 jars of last summer's honey to the door. Nobody said the word that everyone was thinking. Yenna came through the pass gate at mid-morning, when the frost was still white on the cobblestones. She was tall, iron-gray, and unhurried. She wore a road coat that had seen hard miles, and she carried a satchel of dark leather worn soft at the corners. Her tusks were the pale color of old birch bark. She walked straight to the forge house door and knocked twice, firmly, with the flat of her hand. Marit answered. She was 31 years old, practical and careful with strangers, and the sight of an orc woman on her father's step, alone, at this hour, in this autumn, made her go very still. "I have come to see Edvard Karl," Yenna said. "I know he is ill. I will not stay long if he wishes it. But I have traveled a considerable distance, and I would be grateful for the chance to speak with him." Marit looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Yenna," the orc woman said. "Your father will know it." Soren appeared at his sister's shoulder, 28, broader, their father's build. He looked at Yenna with the wariness the whole valley had carried toward her kind for as long as anyone in Callow Thresh could remember. It was not cruelty, it was simply the weight of rumor and distance, the kind of wariness that fills in where knowledge has been absent too long. "He's resting," Soren said. "Then I will wait," Yenna said, without heat, and stepped back from the door to give them room. She waited on the low stone bench beside the forge entrance, her satchel on her knees. After 20 minutes, Marit came back out. "He wants to see you," she said, as though the fact surprised her. "He said your name and then he went quiet for a moment. And then he said to let you in." The front room of the forge house was warm and smelled of pine resin and the soup that had been left on the stove. Edvard Karl sat in the chair by the window in a blanket and his work boots, because he had refused, so far, to give up the boots. He was 68 years old, and he looked it in the way that a well-made tool looks its age, not broken, not diminished, but thoroughly, honestly used. His hands were still large and scarred from the anvil. His hair was white. When Yenna came into the room, he looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "You got old." "So did you," Yenna said. She sat down in the chair across from him, Marit had put it there without being asked, and set her satchel on the floor. "I heard you were ill. I thought I had more time." "You and everyone else," Edvard said. He was trying to make it dry, but the truth of it was in his face, and he did not quite manage the distance he was aiming for. He looked at Marit and Soren, standing in the doorway. "Sit down," he told them. "Both of you." They sat. "This woman," he said, and then he stopped, and was quiet for a moment in the particular way of a man who has kept something for a long time and is trying to decide where to begin. "There is a story she knows that you don't. I'd like you to hear it." Yenna opened her satchel. She took out a bound journal, orc-made, the cover stitched in a pattern of river reeds, and set it on her knees. She did not open it yet. 30 years ago, she said, I was hunted. She said it simply, the way she might say, the road was muddy, not for effect, but because it was simply the beginning of the thing. She had been a young clan war council, traveling alone through the Ashvin Pass in the worst winter in 40 years. There had been a border dispute, the valley settlements pressing north, the eastern clans refusing to yield a water right they had held for a century. Yenna had been carrying sealed documents from the clan elders to the border commission, documents that 2 men on the valley side very much did not want delivered. They had sent riders. She had been 3 days out of the pass when they caught up with her. She had lost them in the dark above the tree line, but not before taking an arrow in the shoulder. She came down off the ridge on foot, in the snow, with her horse gone and her shoulder bleeding through the wrapping she had made from her own coat. It was past midnight when she reached the edge of Callow Thresh. Every house was dark. Every door was shut. She was an orc woman, alone, bleeding, in a valley that had been locked in a border dispute with her clan for 3 seasons. She did not blame the dark windows. She understood them. The forge was lit. She had not expected that. A forge at midnight, the coals still breathing, a thin line of orange light under the door. She stood outside it for a long time, deciding. Then she knocked. Edvard Karl had been the one at the anvil, 30 years old then, working a late commission because he could not sleep. He opened the door and looked at the orc woman bleeding in the snow in front of him. He did not ask her who was chasing her. He did not ask what clan she came from, or what she had done, or which side of the border dispute she was on. He said, "Come inside. There's heat." He put her in the charcoal shed at the back of the forge, which was warm from the banked fire and had a pallet that his apprentice used sometimes in bad weather. He brought her water and clean rags and the tin of drawing salve he used for burns. He dressed the wound himself, which took longer than either of them would have liked and during which neither of them said much of anything. He brought her bread and dried apples and a jar of his wife's preserves, because it was what there was. She stayed for 3 days. Then the riders came through the valley, not hunting her now, only looking for a document she had already hidden in the rock face above the tree line, and Edvard came to the charcoal shed and said, quietly, "Stay still and don't make a sound." They searched the forge with the professional thoroughness of men who did not find what they were looking for. They left. She stayed for the rest of that winter. The arrow wound had gone deeper than it looked, and the cold had done something to her shoulder that did not heal quickly. Edvard fed her from his own stores, which were not large. He brought her books from the village lending shelf. The librarian had assumed they were for his apprentice. He fixed the satchel clasp she had broken in the scramble above the tree line. He did not ask her anything she had not volunteered. In spring, when the pass reopened, she was ready to go. She came to find him at the anvil on the morning she left, and she told him she would not tell anyone what he had done. Not because she was ashamed of it, and not because she thought it was wrong, but because Callothresh was a valley of ordinary people who were already frightened and already caught between forces larger than themselves, and a story about a man who had sheltered a clan war council through the winter would bring down exactly the kind of attention that would not serve him well. She had made the riders believe she had come through the valley at speed and moved on. The librarian thought the books were for the apprentice. The valley had a rumor, she had never quite learned where it started, that Edvard Karl had driven off an orc raider one winter night. She had let the rumor stand. She had let the false version be the version that Callothresh carried for 30 years. But she had entered the true account in the clan's memory record the same spring she left. She had written it in the Eastern script, in the journal she now held on her knees. Every detail, the midnight knock, the charcoal shed, the bread, the books, the silence kept. She had carried the record with her for 3 decades, in every posting and every peace negotiation the clan had sent her to. She had shown it to no one. She had been waiting until she could show it to him. Marit had her hand over her mouth. Soren was looking at his father. Edvard, in his chair, had the expression of a man who had not expected to feel quite this much about something he had known for 30 years. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. "I know," Yenna said. "I wanted you to know before you died that it was remembered. Not by me alone. By the record." She opened the journal to the page she had kept. She turned it and set it on the arm of his chair so he could see the Eastern script, the clean, careful lines of it, the way the clan recorded things that mattered. "The document," Soren said, slowly. "The one the writers were looking for. What was it?" Yenna looked at him. "The water rights agreement," she said. "The first draft of what became the Ashfin Peace. The document that ended the border dispute your valley had been living inside for 3 years." She paused. "It arrived at the Border Commission 6 days after I left this forge. Your father's 4 weeks of bread and firewood were, in a modest way, the reason the valley's northern fields were not fought over for the following generation." The room was quiet for a long time. Edvard looked at the journal, and then he looked at Yenna. "You brokered the Ashfin Peace," he said. It was not quite a question. "Eventually," she said. "I had a lot of years to work on it." He laughed, short, surprised, and completely real, the laugh of a man who had not laughed in weeks. It cost him something physically, and he pressed his hand to his chest after, but he did not seem to regret it. She stayed 2 more days. She slept in the room Marit gave her, the apprentice's room, which seemed appropriate, and she sat with Edvard in the evenings while Marit and Soren were in and out with soup and the neighbors who came to pay their respects. She told him about the clan, about the decades of slow and careful work that the Ashfin peace had grown into, about the water rights framework that now covered 6 valleys and 4 clan territories. She told him about the librarian's books, which she had returned by post 2 seasons after leaving, with a note that gave no name and no explanation. Edvard told her about his wife, who had died 12 years ago. He told her about Marit, who had her mother's stubbornness, and Soren, who had neither of their tempers and was probably the better for it. He told her about the forge, and about the work that he was most proud of, which was a set of iron gates for the valley schoolhouse that he had made for nothing because the town did not have the money and he thought children should have a gate that fit properly. On the second evening, Marit sat with them. She asked Yenna questions, careful ones, honest ones, the questions of a woman who was putting a story together in real time and wanted to get it right. By the end of the evening she was not careful anymore, she was just talking. Edvard Karl died 3 mornings later, quietly, in the chair he had refused to give up. Before he died, he asked Yenna to leave the journal. She placed it on the table beside his chair. He put his hand flat on the cover for a moment, not opening it, just resting his hand there, and then he nodded, and that was all he needed to say. Marit and Soren stood with Yenna at the forge door on the morning she left. The first hard frost had come in the night, and the cobblestones were white and clean. "We didn't know," Marit said. She said it quietly, as a fact, without accusation, for herself, or perhaps for the valley. "He didn't want you to worry," Yenna said. That was the kind of man he was. Soren asked her if they could share the journal. She told him the clan's record was their father's, and his children's, and she hoped they would read it when they were ready. She left the Eastern clan record on the table in the forge house, where any person of Callothresh who came to pay their respects could see the open page, the date, the careful script, the name Edvard Karl written in the Eastern hand in the column reserved for acts that the record considered worth keeping. By midwinter, the valley had read it. The school had a new sign above the gates Edvard had made, small and plain, the gates were named for him. The pass itself, by a petition Marit took to the Valley Council and the council passed without debate, was renamed Karl's Pass. Yenna did not learn about the pass until the following spring, when the clan's road courier brought her a letter from Marit, written in the careful hand of someone who had spent some time on it. The letter said, among other things, that the forge had been reopened by an apprentice from the next valley who had trained under her father 3 years ago and who was now making a set of iron window catches for the schoolhouse, for nothing, because he said the school ought to have window catches that fit properly. Yenna folded the letter and put it in her satchel, in the place where the journal had been. It was a good place for it.